There's a woman sleeping inside a wine barrel in Portland, Oregon right now. Not a regular barrel. Not one of those decorative half barrels people use as flower pots outside Italian restaurants. This thing is over 6.5 feet tall, nearly 7 feet long, made from French white oak that spent 3 decades aging Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley before anyone ever dragged it to a rail yard. And she sealed every crack in it herself. Her name is Mirka Zelenko. She's 47, sandy blonde hair chopped uneven above the ears, a streak of early gray running from her right temple back behind the ear, like a brushstroke she didn't ask for. Bump on the bridge of her nose from a break that never got set right, chipped front tooth, a small daisy tattooed on the inside of her left ankle from a night in her 20s. She doesn't talk about much anymore. Before Portland, before the barrel, before any of this, she ran the grill station at a restaurant called Rosemary and Salt on Hawthorne Boulevard. 12-hour shifts, the kind of place where the brunch crowd lines up at 9:30 on a Sunday for a $14 egg dish, and nobody tips more than 18%. She worked that line for 6 years. She knew every burner's dead spot. She could tell you which pan had the wobble and which one sat flat. That kind of knowledge doesn't transfer anywhere, and when the restaurant closed in November 2023, neither did she. The landlord gave her 30 days. She stretched it to 45 by paying half. Then she was out. Her first shelter was a tent, a green Coleman two-person that a woman at the Blanchett House Day Center gave her in late January 2024. Mirka set it up along the Springwater Corridor Trail, about a quarter-mile east of 82nd Avenue, tucked between a blackberry thicket and a chain-link fence that separated the path from the back parking lot of a tire shop. Dozens of other tents lined that stretch. Some had been there for months. Some had tarps thrown over them, and shopping carts parked outside like mailboxes. The tent kept the rain off. That's the nicest thing she could say about it. Portland rain isn't like rain in other cities. It doesn't fall. It hangs. It saturates the air until everything you own feels damp, and then it gets into the nylon, and then it gets into the sleeping bag, and then it gets into your bones. And by February you're sleeping in a wet sack on wet ground, wondering why you're shivering at 41 degrees when that shouldn't be cold enough to shiver. But it is. 41 degrees and wet will eat you alive if you let it. Mirka learned something in that tent that most people who've never been homeless don't understand. Temperature isn't the enemy. Moisture is. Cold you can fight. Cold plus wet, with wind pushing through single-wall nylon that might as well be a grocery bag. That's a different animal. She woke up one morning in early March with her fingertips white and numb. Not frostbite, not quite, but close enough that she sat with her hands jammed under her armpits for 20 minutes before she could feel her knuckles again. The tent lasted until April. A sweep took it. The city's impact reduction teams came through with a truck and orange cones and a 72-hour notice that Mirka never saw because she'd been at the day center when they posted it. She came back to an empty spot where the blackberry thicket had been cut back and the chain-link fence had a new padlock. Gone. After the tent, she slept in doorways for a while, under the Burnside Bridge for 9 nights in May, counting because counting gave her something to hold on to. In the back of a shuttered dry cleaner on any sandy boulevard where the back door didn't latch until the landlord screwed it shut with a power drill while she was inside, and she had to climb out through a transom window that was barely wide enough for her shoulders. She spent June and July sleeping behind a dumpster outside a warehouse on SE 3rd Avenue in the Central East Side Industrial District. The warehouse processed recycled cardboard. It smelled like wet paper and machine oil. The dumpster sat on a concrete pad that was cracked down the middle, and at night she'd lay a piece of foam she'd pulled from a couch someone left on the curb and try to sleep before the compactors started at 5 in the morning. Her world got small. Blanchett House for meals, the Central Library on SW 10th for a few hours of warmth, and the bathroom. The Union Gospel Mission on W. Burnside when she needed a shower. A circuit. She ran it every day. Same route, same stops, same faces, same conversations with the same people who were all doing the same thing, which was surviving without a plan for anything beyond the next 12 hours. This was her life through the fall of 2024. And then she found the barrel. The how of it matters because nobody goes looking for a 5,000-liter French oak wine barrel on purpose. You don't see one at Goodwill. You don't stumble across one at a garage sale. What happened was this. A sour beer brewery called Ferment Meridian on SE 7th Avenue, about 4 blocks south of the Hawthorne Bridge, went under in October 2024. Sour beer requires aging in large oak vessels, and Ferment Meridian had 3 of them. Big, curved, iron-hooped things that looked like something out of a fairy tale, if fairy tales took place in an industrial loft with exposed ductwork and a taproom that smelled like barn floor. 2 of the barrels went to another brewery in Bend. The 3rd one didn't sell. Nobody wanted it. It had a crack in one of the staves near the bung, and a slow leak that made it useless for liquid. The owner, a guy named Travis, posted it on Craigslist for $400. Nobody bit. He dropped it to $200, then $100, then free U-Haul. Travis needed the building empty by November 15th. On November 12th, he hired 2 guys with a flatbed truck to take everything left in the space to the dump, including the barrel. The guys loaded the barrel onto the flatbed with a forklift, drove it about 1.5 miles south to a rail-adjacent lot behind SE Division Street near the Brooklyn Rail Yard, and left it there. Not at the dump. At the lot, because the dump charges by weight, and this thing weighed somewhere around 1,000 pounds, and neither of them wanted to pay for it. So they rolled it off the truck into some weeds next to a rusted shipping container and drove away. It sat there for 3 weeks. Nobody touched it. Nobody cared. It was just another piece of debris in a part of the city where debris is the scenery. Mirka saw it on December 4th, 2024. She was cutting through the lot on her way to a spot behind a self-storage facility where she'd been sleeping. The barrel was on its side in dead grass, half hidden by a tarp that had blown onto it from somewhere else. She walked past it, stopped, walked back. 6 feet 9 inches long, 6 feet 9 inches at its widest, tapering to about 6'2" at the flat ends. Made from French sessile oak, which she didn't know at the time and wouldn't have cared about if she did. What she cared about was the inside. She crawled through the bunghole end, which was too small. Then she found the head, the flat circular end, and pushed on it. It gave slightly. She pushed harder. It scraped inward about 2 inches before catching on the groove it was seated in. She went and found a piece of rebar in the weeds, came back, wedged it between the head and the body of the barrel, and pried. The head popped free with a sound like a knuckle cracking, and she was staring into a cylinder of curved oak that was bigger than any room she'd slept in since losing her apartment. She could stand up inside it, not at the very edges where the barrel tapered, but at the center, at the widest point. She could stand straight and still have clearance above her head. She's 5'6". The interior ceiling at the midpoint was about 6'4". She lifted her arms, didn't touch anything. The air inside smelled like wine that had been gone for years. Oak and tannin, and something faintly sweet, like dried fruit left in a drawer. The wood was smooth, not rough-sawn smooth, but polished by 30 years of liquid and time, with a slight tartrate crust on the lower curve that sparkled when her phone flashlight caught it. Crystals. Actual crystals. Tartaric acid precipitating out of the wine had left deposits on the interior wood that looked like rock candy growing on the inside of a wooden planet. She sat down in there and pulled the head back into place from the inside and didn't come out for 3 hours. That first night she slept in the barrel without sealing anything, just her sleeping bag on the curved floor, the head leaned back into its groove but not locked, her backpack wedged against it as a doorstop. The temperature outside dropped to 36 degrees. Inside the barrel, wearing her coat and sleeping bag, she was fine, not warm exactly, but not cold either, not shivering, not that bone-deep wet chill that she'd been fighting since January. The wood had a kind of warmth to it that didn't make sense to her yet, like sleeping inside a thick coat. The walls of the barrel were 2.5 inches of solid oak, and 2.5 inches of dense hardwood doesn't stop heat the way fiberglass insulation does, but it does something else. It stores it, takes the heat from her body, absorbs it into the wood, and then feeds it back over hours, keeping the interior temperature from swinging the way it does in a tent where the air goes from body warm to ambient in minutes once you stop generating heat. She didn't know any of this. She just knew she slept. For the first time since March, she slept past dawn. Morning came through the bunghole, a circle of gray light about 2 inches across It hit the opposite wall and made a bright dot like a projector. She lay there, watching it move as the sun tracked east to west. The barrel was on its side, and from the inside, the curved walls rose above and below her, like the ribs of a boat turned upside down. She could see the seams between the staves, the iron hoops pressing dark bands across the wood at regular intervals. And she could see the cracks. Not big ones, not structural failures, but gaps between staves where the wood had dried out and shrunk over the years since it last held liquid. Hairline separations where daylight came through as thin, bright lines, like the barrel had been stitched together and some of the stitches had loosened. Air came through those gaps. Not a lot, not like a tent in wind, but enough that she could feel it on her face when the wind blew, a faint cold breath threading through the seams. The leaky stave near the bung was worse. A crack about 8 inches long running along the grain, wide enough to fit a pencil tip into. When the wind came from the east, she could feel a steady stream of cold air through that crack, like someone blowing through a straw. The barrel was better than anything she'd had in a year. But it had holes, tiny ones, everywhere. And Mirka, lying on her back in a 1,000-pound oak cylinder in a vacant lot next to a rail yard in southeast Portland, decided she was going to seal every one of them. She didn't know anything about cooperage, had never heard the word, didn't know that barrels are held together without nails or glue, that the only things keeping the staves in place are iron hoops and the precision of the taper cut, and that the final seal comes from the wood itself swelling when it contacts liquid. Coopers have known this for centuries. The staves are cut wider at the middle than at the ends, bent over open fire, drawn together by hammering the hoops down, and when you fill the barrel, the wood absorbs moisture and expands against itself until it's watertight. But Mirka's barrel hadn't held liquid in years. The wood had dried, the swelling had reversed, and the seams had opened. She had a different problem than a cooper. A cooper needs a barrel to hold wine. Mirka needed a barrel to hold heat. Heat moves through the walls of a container by conduction, the same way a metal pan gets hot on a stove. The heat from her body would pass through the oak and escape into the air outside, and there was nothing she could do about that except appreciate that oak is a lousy conductor compared to metal or concrete. Dense wood moves heat slowly. That's why wooden spoons don't burn your hand and metal ones do. The wood was doing half her job for her just by being wood. But the cracks were a different story. Air moving through a gap carries heat with it directly, and even a narrow gap in a 2.5-inch wall can bleed warmth faster than the whole rest of the wall combined. A sealed barrel would be dramatically warmer than a leaky one, because most of the heat loss wasn't through the wood. It was through the spaces between the wood. Mirka didn't think about it in those terms. She thought about it the way a cook thinks about keeping a stock pot covered. You put the lid on because the heat stays in. Simple as that. Seal the gaps. Keep the lid on. Stay warm. She'd spent 6 years managing heat on a grill line. She understood the idea, even if she didn't have the vocabulary for it. The first thing she sealed was the cracked stave. She tried duct tape. She had a partial roll she'd been carrying in her bag since the tent, and she ran a strip of it along the crack on the outside of the barrel, pressing it into the wood with her thumb. It held for about a day. The curve of the barrel and the rough texture of the oak fought the adhesive, and by the second morning the tape had peeled back at both ends and was flapping in the wind like a flag. She tried caulk next. Found a tube of silicone caulk in a dumpster behind a hardware store on S.E. Hawthorne, half used, with a dried plug in the tip that she cut off with a box cutter. She ran a bead of caulk along the crack, inside and outside, and let it cure overnight. This worked better. The silicone was flexible enough to follow the curve, adhered to the wood, and sealed the crack completely. She pressed her face against it, and couldn't feel any air coming through. One crack down. About 60 more to go. The silicone tube ran out after 3 cracks. She needed more, and she needed a lot of it. Over the next week, Mirka made a routine of checking dumpsters behind the hardware stores and construction sites in the Central East Side. She found 2 more partial tubes of silicone, one clear and one white. She found a tube of something called polyurethane sealant that was stickier and harder to work with, but sealed just as well. She found a caulk gun with a broken trigger that she fixed by jamming a piece of dowel rod into the ratchet mechanism. But the hairline gaps between the staves were a different problem. There were dozens of them, and they were too narrow for caulk to penetrate. Running a bead over them just sat on the surface and didn't fill the gap at all. She needed something that could get into the cracks and then expand. The answer came from a man named Leonard Voss. He was 63, former longshoreman, lived in a van parked on N Columbia Boulevard near the rail yards on the north end of the city. Mirka met him at the Blanchette house over oatmeal on a Tuesday morning in mid-December. She'd been telling another woman about the barrel, about trying to seal the seams, and Leonard overheard her from 2 chairs down. "You need beeswax," he said. She looked at him. "Melt it and drip it into the seam. It runs in thin, fills the gap, hardens in about a minute. Coopers have been doing it for hundreds of years. You heat it with a torch or a candle and just let gravity pull it into the crack." Leonard knew this because he'd spent 2 summers in the early 2000s working a side gig at a cooperage in McMinnville, about 40 miles southwest of Portland, hauling staves and stacking wood. He wasn't a cooper. He was a laborer, but he'd watched the work, and he remembered the beeswax. "Where do I get beeswax?" Mirka asked. "Farmer's market. Craft store, where you melt a candle, but it's got to be beeswax, not paraffin. Paraffin's brittle when it cools. Beeswax stays a little bit soft. It'll flex with the wood." On S.E. Foster Road, for $1.60, she brought them back to the barrel, lit one with a lighter, and held it over the first gap between staves, tilting it so the melted wax ran into the seam. It worked exactly the way Leonard said it would. The liquid wax, bright gold and thin as water, flowed into the hairline gap and disappeared. She could see it running along the inside of the seam like a vein filling up. When it cooled, the gap was sealed. No air. She ran her hand over it. Smooth, the wax had settled into the wood and left a faintly golden line along the seam, and when she pressed against it, it gave slightly under her finger, flexible, alive in a way that the silicone wasn't. She spent 3 evenings in mid-December doing this. Candle in one hand, lighter in the other, moving inch by inch along every visible seam on the interior of the barrel. She started at the bunghole end and worked toward the head, tracing each stave junction in the phone flashlight beam, dripping wax into every gap she could find. Her fingers got burned a dozen times. The barrel filled with the smell of hot beeswax and old oak, and that smell mixed together into something she started to look forward to. Something warm. By December 20th, every seam on the interior was sealed. The head was the bigger project. The circular flat end of the barrel, the part she'd pried off to get in, was her door. It was made of several planks joined edge to edge, held together by 2 crossbars called battens, and seated in a groove cut into the ends of the staves. That groove is called a croze, and in a working barrel, the head is wedged into the croze so tightly that the pressure of the hoops keeps it locked in place. Traditional coopers stuff the croze with dried cattail leaves before they set the head. The leaves swell with moisture and complete the seal. Mirka's croze was dry. The cattail leaves, if they'd ever been there, were gone or crumbled. The head sat in the groove with about a 16th-inch gap all the way around, and when the wind blew, the gap whistled. Low, almost inaudible, but she could feel it. She thought about this for 2 days. Then she went to a pond behind a strip mall on SE 82nd Avenue, where cattails grew in the ditch along the parking lot edge. It was late December. The cattails were brown and dead-looking, stalks bent over and leathery. She pulled up a dozen of them and stripped the flat leaves off the stalks. They were dry and papery, about 1/2 inch wide, and they crumbled if she bent them too sharply. She soaked them overnight in a plastic bucket she'd gotten from behind a sushi restaurant. By morning they were pliable again, dark brown and slick, smelling like pond water. She carried them back to the barrel in a trash bag. From the inside, she pulled the head out of the croze, laid the wet cattail leaves into the groove, overlapping them, pressing them flat with her fingers, building up 2 layers around the entire circumference. Then she pushed the head back in. The fit was tighter. The head moved into the croze with resistance, the wet cattail compressing between wood and wood, and when it seated fully, the gap was gone. No whistling. No air. She pressed her ear to the seam and listened. Nothing. She tapped the chime hoop, the outermost iron band at the end of the barrel, with a piece of rebar, driving it a quarter-inch tighter the way she'd seen it done in a YouTube video Leonard had shown her on his phone at the day center. The hoop moved down the taper of the staves, squeezing them inward against the head, tightening the whole assembly like a fist closing. The barrel was sealed. December 22nd, 2024. Portland dropped to 29 degrees overnight with a wind chill of 22. Ice on the puddles in the lot. Frost on the shipping container. Frost on the barrel, too, white and feathery on the outside of the oak, gathering in the concavities between the hoops. Inside, Mirka was wearing her coat and sleeping bag, lying on a piece of closed-cell foam she'd cut from a yoga mat she found behind a gym. The barrel's interior temperature, measured with a meat thermometer she'd kept from her kitchen days, read 47 degrees. Outside, 29. Inside, 47. And she hadn't lit a candle or done anything except lie there. Her body was a furnace. She didn't think of it that way, but that's what was happening. A resting human body puts out about the same heat as a 75-watt light bulb. In a tent, that heat disperses almost instantly through the thin nylon walls and the zipper gaps and the floor contact with the ground. In the barrel, sealed with 2.5 inches of dense oak surrounding her and no air leaks to carry the warmth away, that 75 watts had nowhere to go except into the wood. And the wood held it. This is the thing about oak that makes it different from sheet metal or plastic or nylon. It's heavy. A 50 hectoliter foudre, empty, weighs somewhere between 800 and 1,200 pounds. That's a lot of mass, and mass holds temperature the way a cast iron skillet holds heat after you take it off the flame. You heat it up slowly, and it cools down slowly. And the bigger it is, the slower the cycle. Mirka's body was heating the barrel, and the barrel was holding the heat and feeding it back to her, and the sealed staves weren't letting any of it bleed through the gaps anymore. By midnight on December 22nd, the interior read 51 degrees. She'd been inside for 4 hours. The temperature was still climbing. She fell asleep to the sound of rain on oak, a hollow drumming that sounded nothing like rain on nylon, or rain on metal, or rain on anything else she'd ever heard. Thick, muffled, like the barrel was translating the rain into a different language before letting it reach her ears. Christmas came. She woke up and the bunghole was letting in a circle of white light that meant the sky was overcast. The meat thermometer said 49 degrees. Outside, she could see her breath. Inside the barrel, she couldn't. Leonard came by on Christmas morning with 2 cups of coffee from the 7-Eleven on Powell Boulevard and a pint of Jim Beam that he said was medicinal. He sat on an overturned milk crate outside the barrel, and she sat inside with the head removed, her feet dangling out, and they drank coffee and didn't say much. He looked at the beeswax seams and the cattail stuffed crows and nodded. "You did this right," he said. "I did what you told me. No, I told you about the wax. You figured out the rest." She had. The cattail was from a YouTube video, but the silicone, the caulk gun, the way she'd organized the ceiling from the most leaky seam to the least, starting with the cracked stave and ending with the hairline gaps, that was her. Years on a grill line had taught her how to triage. When you're running 5 burners and 2 tickets come in at the same time, you deal with the one that's burning first. She treated the barrel the same way. The biggest leak got fixed first because it was losing the most heat, then the next biggest, then the next. By the time she got to the hairline gaps, the barrel was already warmer than anything she'd slept in, and the beeswax work was refinement, not rescue. Leonard told her something else that morning. He said the barrel shape was doing work she couldn't see. A cylinder has less outside surface compared to its interior space than a box does. If you took the same amount of wood and built a square room with it, that room would have more wall exposed to the cold air outside. The barrel, being round, had about 20% less surface for the same volume, which meant 20% fewer square inches losing heat to the wind. This is why silos are round, why igloos are domed, why a thermos bottle is a cylinder inside a cylinder. The shape itself is insulation. Mirka didn't care about the math. She cared that it was 50 degrees inside on a 28-degree morning, without a heater, without electricity, without anything except her body and a sealed oak cylinder and 2 beeswax candles she lit sometimes in the evening when she wanted to read. January 2025. Portland got 3 days of freezing rain that coated every surface in a 1/4 inch of ice. Power went out in 24,000 homes. TriMet suspended bus service. Mirka's barrel sat in the lot, ice-coated, gleaming, the iron hoops encased in clear ice that made them look like they were behind glass. Inside, 44 degrees. Cold, colder than she liked. But she wore her coat, her hat, her gloves, wrapped herself in the sleeping bag, and slept. Not comfortable the way a person with a furnace is comfortable, but fine in the way that matters. She could sleep, she could think, and when she woke up, her fingers worked. The other people in the lot had it worse. There were 8 camps near the barrel by then, a loose constellation of tents and tarps, and 1 RV with a broken axle. A woman named Diane, 52, sleeping in a nylon tent 60 feet from the barrel, told Mirka her sleeping bag was soaked through and she couldn't get warm. Mirka invited her into the barrel for the night. They slept head to toe, 2 women in a wine barrel, their combined body heat pushing the interior to 53 degrees by midnight. Diane said it was the warmest she'd been since Thanksgiving. 2 bodies in a sealed container generate twice the heat. The barrel could hold it. The oak didn't care where the warmth came from, as long as it came. February brought a different problem: condensation. Warm air holds more moisture than cold air. Inside the barrel, Mirka's breathing and her body's evaporation were adding moisture to the enclosed space, and when that moisture-laden air contacted the interior wood surface, which was cooled by the outside temperature, the water condensed. Droplets formed on the upper curve of the barrel and ran down the staves to the lowest point of the interior. She woke up one morning in a puddle. Not a big puddle, maybe half a cup of water. But it was on her foam mat, and it soaked through, and it meant the sleeping bag was damp, and damp is the enemy she'd been fighting since the tent. She tried venting, left the bunghole unplugged during the day to let air circulate. This helped with condensation but killed the temperature at night when she plugged it back in. The barrel breathed through the bunghole like a nostril, and when it was open, the warm air left and the cold air came in, and the advantage of the sealed oak disappeared. She needed ventilation that didn't cost her warmth. Leonard didn't have an answer for this one. But a woman at the day center named Petra, 41, an electrician's apprentice before she lost her housing, told Mirka about something she'd seen in old European farmhouses: a vent with a baffle, a tube or pipe that lets air move, but with a bend or a curve in it that slows the flow and prevents direct wind from blowing through. The air can exchange, but slowly, and the cold air has to travel through a path that gives it time to pick up some warmth from the surrounding material before it reaches the living space. Mirka made one from a piece of PVC pipe she found in a construction dumpster, 3-inch diameter, about 18 inches long. She bent it into an S shape using a heat gun she borrowed from Leonard, who'd borrowed it from someone at the Columbia Boulevard camp. She pushed one end through the bunghole, sealed the gap around it with silicone, and left the other end pointing downward on the outside so rain couldn't drip in. The S-curve meant air could pass through the pipe, but not quickly and not directly. Wind hitting the outside end had to make 2 turns before reaching the interior. By the time it got through, most of its velocity was gone. The barrel could exhale moisture slowly through the pipe without hemorrhaging heat through a straight opening. Within 3 days, the condensation problem was manageable. Not gone, but reduced to a light dampness on the upper staves that dried during the day when she opened the head. By March 2025, Mirka had been in the barrel for 3 months. She'd added things: a piece of carpet remnant from a dumpster on Hawthorne that she cut to fit the curved floor, a battery-powered LED string light that she looped around the interior hoops, powered by 4 AA batteries she bought at the dollar store, giving the inside a warm amber glow at night that turned the oak walls the color of honey. A small shelf made from a plank wedged between 2 hoops where she kept her phone, her meat thermometer, a paperback copy of Animal Dreams by Barbara Kingsolver that she'd gotten from the library book swap, and a photograph of her mother. The photograph was the only thing she'd kept from the apartment. Everything else, the cookware, the clothes, the second-hand furniture, the box of recipe cards she'd collected for years, had been lost in the eviction, or thrown away, or given to people who needed it more. The photograph was her mother standing in front of a sunflower field in eastern Oregon, squinting into the sun, wearing a denim jacket with the collar popped. Her mother died in 2019. Heart attack, age 67. Mirka carried the photo in a Ziploc bag inside her jacket pocket. In the barrel, she pinned it to the shelf plank with a thumbtack. She was making a home. She knew this. She also knew that the lot could be swept at any time, that the barrel was technically abandoned property on land she didn't own, that everything she was building could be taken the way the tent was taken, the way the dry cleaner was screwed shut with her inside it. But she sealed the cracks anyway. The barrel changed how other people at the camp saw her. At first, when she'd moved in, the reaction was confusion. A couple of guys in the RV called it the keg and made jokes about living inside a drink. Diane called it unusual, but didn't push further. A younger man named Scott, maybe 30, who'd been in the lot since September, walked over one evening and knocked on the barrel with his knuckles. "You actually sleep in this thing?" "Yeah." "How?" But he came back 2 days later and asked if she'd show him the inside. She pulled the head off and he stuck his upper body through the opening and looked around. The beeswax seams, the cattail sealed crows, the carpet, the LED lights. "It's warm in here," he said, surprised. "Warmer than out there." "How much warmer?" She showed him the meat thermometer. 48 degrees inside, 34 outside. That's 14 degrees. Math checks out. After that, people stopped joking. A few of them asked questions. A woman named Georgia, sleeping in her car 3 spots over, asked Mirka where she could find a barrel. Mirka told her about the brewery, about Craigslist, about the used barrel brokers she'd found out about from Leonard. American Canyon, Sonoma, places that sold retired wine barrels for a couple $100, sometimes free if you could haul them. Georgia didn't get a barrel. She didn't have a truck, or $400, or a flatbed, or any way to move 1,000 pounds of oak. Most people didn't. The barrel wasn't a solution for homelessness in Portland. It was a solution for Mirka, in that lot, with that barrel, at that time. She never claimed otherwise, but something about it bothered people. Not the people at the camp, the people outside. The first complaint came in January. A business owner on SE Division Street called the city's non-emergency line about a large wooden structure in the vacant lot. The impact reduction team came out, looked at it, and left. A second complaint in March, calling it an eyesore. The team came out again, talked to Mirka, looked at the interior, took notes, left. She didn't hear from them again until May, when a notice appeared taped to the shipping containers saying the lot would be cleared in 30 days. That gave her until June. She spent May doing something she hadn't done since losing her apartment, planning ahead. She talked to Leonard about other lots. She talked to a man named Raymond at the Blanchett House, who knew the rail corridors on the north side of the city, the industrial stretches along Columbia Boulevard, where encampments were tolerated longer because nobody complained. She talked to Petra about whether the barrel could be moved. It could. A barrel that size, on its side, can be rolled. The bilge, the fattest part, acts as the rolling surface. The iron hoops protect the wood from the ground. A single person can roll a 50-hectoliter food tray on flat ground if the surface is hard and level. Mirka tested it, pushed from the back. It rocked, then rolled, then kept going. Steering was the problem. The barrel went straight but didn't turn. She had to stop, reposition, push again. On June 2nd, at 4 in the morning, she rolled the barrel out of the lot, across S.E. Gideon Street, along the rail access road to a spot she'd scouted behind a decommissioned electrical substation at the edge of the Brooklyn rail yard, hidden by a concrete wall on one side and a chain-link fence with black privacy slats on the other. Weeds grew waist-high. A cottonwood tree overhung the area. She rolled the barrel into position, checked the seals, stuffed fresh cattail into the crows where the rolling had loosened it, reset the head, and went to sleep. The new spot was better than the lot in almost every way. Quieter, more hidden. The concrete wall blocked the prevailing west wind. The cottonwood would provide shade in summer. And nobody walked by. The rail access road was gated, and the gate was locked, and Mirka had found a gap in the fence about 40 yards north where she could slip through sideways. She resealed 2 stave joints that had cracked open during the roll. More silicone, more beeswax. The routine was familiar now. She could seal a 6-inch stave gap in under 5 minutes. The muscle memory of dripping wax into a seam, watching it flow, waiting for it to set, pressing the edge with her thumb to check the seal. It was like mise en place, like prepping a station before service. Repetitive, precise, and satisfying in a way she hadn't felt since the restaurant. Summer in Portland is different from winter. July and August are dry and warm, often above 90, and the barrel became an oven by late afternoon. 96 degrees inside on a sunny day with the head sealed. She adapted, left the head off during the day, opened the bunghole vent fully, hung a wet towel from one of the hoops, and let evaporation cool the air. The oak walls, which had stored her body heat in winter, now stored the day's warmth and released it slowly after sunset, keeping the interior at 72 degrees by 10 at night, while the outside air had dropped to 60. The thermal mass worked both ways. A 6-hour delay between what happened outside and what happened inside. Fall came, and the barrel went through its first anniversary, December 2025. 1 full year. Mirka had changed, not in the ways people expect when they hear homeless woman. She hadn't found housing. She hadn't gotten a job. She hadn't gotten back on her feet in the language of social workers and city reports. She was still sleeping in a wine barrel behind a decommissioned electrical substation near a rail yard. She was still making her circuit: Blanchett House, Central Library, Union Gospel Mission. She was still carrying everything she owned in a backpack. But she had stopped shivering. And that sounds small, but it isn't. A year without shivering. A year of sleeping through the night. A year of waking up and having her fingers work. A year of not dreading the temperature forecast. A year of lying inside a curved wooden room that smelled like oak and old wine and beeswax, listening to rain or wind or silence, and knowing that the walls around her were 2.5 inches thick and sealed tight and holding. The barrel had given her something that the tent and the doorways and the dumpster spot never had. Not warmth exactly, though warmth was part of it. More like containment, the feeling of being inside something that was built to hold, built to not let things escape, built to keep what was put inside it. Wine barrels are made to age things, to let time work on what's inside them without letting the outside world interfere. The oak breathes, a tiny bit, through the pores of the wood, and oxygen reaches the wine in quantities so small they're measured in milligrams per liter per year, and the wine changes because of it, slowly, in a direction that coopers and winemakers have been arguing about for 600 years. Mirka wasn't wine. But she was aging, changing. The barrel let her do it without being soaked by rain or frozen by wind, or swept by a city crew, or stared at by someone walking past. She was inside something. For the first time in 2 years, she was inside. January 2026. Portland got cold again. 30 degrees, then 27, then a hard freeze at 19 degrees that killed pipes in Selwood and Irvington, and had the news running stories about warming centers. Inside the barrel, 39 degrees. 19 outside, 39 inside, a 20-degree spread from body heat and sealed oak alone. No candle, no heater, no fire. She lit 2 beeswax candles that night, the same kind she'd used to seal the staves a year earlier. Each candle puts out about 75 watts of heat. 2 candles plus her body. 225 watts total in a sealed cylinder 6.5 feet across. By midnight, the interior read 46 degrees. She read her book. She ate a granola bar. She drank water from a bottle she kept inside the barrel so it wouldn't freeze. The candlelight moved across the curved walls, catching the beeswax seams and the tartrate crystals, and the iron hoops, throwing shadows that swung when the flames flickered, and the barrel felt in those moments less like a shelter and more like a room, like a place, like the difference between sleeping somewhere and living somewhere, which is a difference that has nothing to do with square footage and everything to do with whether the walls know you're there. Mirka's walls knew she was there. She'd sealed every crack herself. She'd stuffed the crows with cattail. She'd melted wax into every seam. She'd rolled the barrel across a street at 4 a.m. She'd turned a piece of junk that 2 guys left in a field because they didn't want to pay the dump fee into the best shelter she'd had in 2 years, and she'd done it with silicone from a dumpster. beeswax from Goodwill, cattail from a drainage ditch, and knowledge she'd picked up from a man she met over oatmeal. The barrel is still there, behind the substation, next to the concrete wall, under the cottonwood tree that's bare now but will leaf out in April. The privacy fence still has its gap. The bunghole vent still breathes through its S-curved PVC pipe. The head still seats into its crows on a bed of cattail leaves that Mirka replaces every 6 months when they dry out and crumble. She's in there right now, probably. It's February. 43 degrees outside, which means mid-50s inside. Which means she's reading or sleeping or sitting with her back against the curved wall, which cradles her shoulders like it was built for a human body instead of 45 cases of Pinot Noir. Nobody designed this. Nobody planned it. Nobody funded it, or approved it, or inspected it, or granted a permit for it. A brewery went under, and a barrel got dumped, and a woman who used to run a grill line crawled inside and decided to stay. The rest was beeswax and stubbornness, and the physics of dense wood in a cylindrical shape, which is the kind of sentence that sounds absurd until you've spent a January night in a sealed oak barrel and woken up warm. Mirka sealed every crack, and the barrel held.